All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our third and final session of our 2025 New York Seafood Summit. My name is Mike Saramella. I'm the Seafood Safety and Technology Specialist with New York Sea Grant. Been kind of leading this effort for the past 9 years. And I'll give you, first, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping for today's meeting. I'll give a little introduction into Sea Grant, the summit itself, our planning team, before we go through our agenda and get ourselves kicked off for today's event. So this is a hybrid event and it is being recorded. So the recording is going to be made available in the next few weeks on our New York Seafood Summit webpage. That will be sent out to everybody, all registered participants after the event today. If you did not pre-register online, you can make sure you sign up and put your email on there and we'll get that to you as well. If you did not, since this is a hybrid event, we do ask that all of those who are participating online keep your audio muted at all times unless you're actively asking a question, so we limit that background noise. Also, everybody in the room, please make sure that you keep the background noise to a minimum so we can make sure our online participants and the recording is all able to be heard and participate actively. We do have mics that will go around if you have questions during any of the Q&As to make sure that those online participants can also hear those questions. Right. Apologies. There we go. So for those of you who are not familiar with New York Sea Grant, New York Sea Grant is one of 34 university-based programs under NOAA's National Sea Grant College program. New York Sea Grant is a cooperative program between NOAA, Cornell University, and the SUNY system. And for 50 years, New York Sea Grant has worked to support novel research of use to our coastal communities and economies, and has provided technical support through multidisciplinary extension and education programming. You can learn more about New York Sea Grant, who we are, and what we do on our website, www.nysgrant.org. As far as today's event and the New York Seafood Summit, right? We started this summit back in 2016 as a means of engaging and facilitating discussions among the various seafood stakeholders across New York State. This event is our third and final summit of 2025. We had our first in Riverhead at the Riverhead Library, engaging a lot of our commercial fishing industry as well as our oyster industry down there on Long Island, as well as a lot of our elected officials. Our second was up in Geneva, New York. No, yes. Geneva, New York, where we refocused a little bit on some of our recreational anglers who are fishing for food, because there's not much of a seafood industry upstate, but we do have a lot of those recreational anglers who had and wanted a lot of information on the food that they're catching and consuming locally. While we work hard to ensure all of our summit events are accessible and free to all, we do rely heavily on grants and volunteer support and donations. So if you are able, we welcome you to, or encourage you to donate through the QR code on here, or you can find a link at the bottom of our New York Seafood Summit website. I want to give a little bit of a background on the summit, or history of the summit, our summit timeline. I said we started back in 2016, and the event itself has kind of morphed quite a bit since then. It started as just a facilitated discussion around a boardroom table in Manhattan, talking about the challenges and opportunities that exist for our New York seafood businesses. And slowly we kind of grew and expanded that event and opportunity to engage more and engage more folks from across the state, from all the different sectors of New York seafood industries. The first few years were hosted largely in Manhattan as kind of that central location, but we did find it fairly hard to engage many of the producers who did not want to make their way into the city for the meetings and events. And that's when we started to kind of transition and broaden that scope, where we had 3 separate events in 3 different regions across the state. So our Long Island event, our mid-state event here at the Culinary Institute, and then our upstate event typically at Cornell University or Cornell Agritech up in Geneva. We also transitioned during the COVID years to virtual, and then ever since then, we've had hybrid meetings allowing for virtual participation in all of the Seafood Summit events, even after transitioning back to largely in person. And all of the recorded events can be accessed through the Seafood Summit webpage from this year, as well as all previous years as well, if anybody's interested in learning more about some of the previous topics that we've looked at. So I also want to take a minute to introduce our planning team, because none of this would be possible without the support of this team and the various folks who have joined over the years to help support moving these events forward and soliciting our participants. We have myself, Barry Udelson is our aquaculture specialist. He's up in the back here monitoring the chat. Need to let him in. Monitoring the chat for us, as well as helped immensely with coordinating the logistics for all the various farm product that you're going to have an opportunity to taste while you're here today, as well as supporting that agenda. We have 3 colleagues from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Suffolk County from their fisheries team who've helped us to expand that event down to Riverhead to really engage that fishing industry, those local producers. Kristen Gerbino is here today, and then Tara McClintock and Scott Curltula-Wageman are also on that planning team. We transitioned again for our Geneva event to our focus on recreational fisheries. So we brought on our Great Lakes fisheries specialist, Stacy Fergal, and Dr. Susan Cushman from Hobart and William Smith to help us better engage that audience and plan that particular event. Dr. Stephen Frattini, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, was one of our founding members. He, along with me, founded this group and this event and activity back in 2016, and one of those individuals around the boardroom table in Manhattan for our first discussions on the Seafood Summit. And he's been actively engaged and involved in the planning and execution of these events since then. And then Bruce Mattel is the former dean at the Culinary Institute of America right here. He was our endpoint to get the event hosted here at the Culinary Institute and has been very supportive and joined our planning team to help assist in ensuring that the information that we're sharing is relevant, especially to the students and the culinary professionals that may be interested in the content that we bring. So with that, lost it again. All right. The agenda for today, I'm going to transition and pass the mic over to Bruce in just a second to give a little bit of a welcome to the Culinary Institute. We have 2 industry spotlights lined up. We have Acme Smoked Fish and their sustainability team here to talk a little bit about their operation. We've got Nicole Acarina from the Fulton Fish Market Cooperative to talk more about what's happening and changes within the Fulton Fish Market. I will then come back and talk a little bit about the traceability rule and FSMA 204, the Food Safety and Modernization Act. For anybody who's not aware, especially our culinarians, our food service and our restaurants, this will impact them. There are some requirements that fall on them as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that to just help people understand and get better prepared for what's coming. Then we'll transition into a cooking demonstration where Chef Bruce is going to demonstrate some monkfish preparation. And then we'll transition lastly into our networking resource fair, which is going to be in the back foyer, where we'll have a variety of different seafood products for you to taste, different preparations. We also have all of our New York Sea Grant educational resources and tools that you are welcome to take. There's some in the back of the room here, to my left, your right. Then out in the hallway, there's also a lot on aquaculture, seafood, fisheries. CCE has some resources, and I believe some of our speakers also brought some for you as well. So you're welcome to do that and ask questions, mingle amongst all of our participants today. So really quickly, before I pass it to Bruce, just a quick highlight as to what you might see or what you'll see available for tasting later today. We've got Acme smoked fish, smoked whitefish will be out there. The oysters come from Pico Oysters, a Long Island oyster grower. We've got New York steelhead, so steelhead trout farmed land-based for circulating facility right here on Hudson. We've got Skytop Springs rainbow trout coming from the foothills of the Catskills. So they're rainbow Kamloops trout that's going to be served today. Violet Cove oysters, we're not going to be having their oysters today, but they are the first commercially permitted kelp farm on Long Island. And so they have a hot sauce that is up for grabs. There's also the other 2 companies I show here are not New York-based companies, but they are companies that are doing great things with seaweed, a new commodity for New York that there's a lot of interest in expanding on. So we had some seaweed and kelp products brought in from other states to just highlight some of the opportunity and the potential that there exists within that commodity. So with that, I'll invite Chef Bruce down.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hi up there. Hey. I want to welcome you to the CIA. I've been involved with the CIA since I was like 3.5 when I was the prodigy graduate back in 1980. No, just kidding. I was 20, but I did graduate here in 1980. And after I graduated, I was lucky enough to get a job cooking in New York City at French restaurants. My second job in New York, I was hired to work at Le Bernardin, which is a 3-star Michelin seafood restaurant. And at that time, it was pretty new, and it was owned by, and still partially, a brother and sister team, Gilbert and Maggie Lacose. Gilbert unfortunately died very young, and Maggie still owns it with Eric Repair, who you probably know from TV or seen around. Now, these are French people, right? But these French people, the chef, Gilbert, he embraced New York seafood. We were the restaurant, and I say we, but I was there at that time, so I'm gonna say we. We were the restaurant that really put black sea bass on the menu first. We were the restaurant that elevated skate from a trash, quote, trash fish, which I don't believe in any fish is trash, but we elevated skate from what was considered a trash fish that your purveyor would give you for like 30 cents on the pound for your family meal in your restaurant to something that was really fantastic. We elevated monkfish. Not a lot of people would eat monkfish, or lot, as it's called in French. And we put that on the menu, and we sold all these fish dishes for a lot of money. Eventually, the market kind of caught up, and the prices of these fish went higher, but all for good reason. And the fishermen potentially benefited by the higher prices. We would use sea robins in our soup de poisson, right? So here you have early 40 years ago, 40, is it 40 years ago? Yeah, 40 years ago almost, when I worked there, you have really somebody from France come in and try to be much more local and sustainable in terms of their choices for their menu. It was really great to see. Did we have other things? Yes, but we had pretty much all East Coast things. We got scallops from Maine. We got lobsters from Maine. We get oyster, East Coast oysters, ballons from Maine, and then Atlantic oysters. So I wonder why all of this doesn't still happen at the levels that I wish it would, People embracing these fish. We have fish like porgies, porgies or scup or whatever you want to call them. This is a great fish, great tasting fish. In Europe, they call it sea bream. It's a slightly different species, but it is fantastic. So anyway, what this brings me to is the CIA and welcoming you. The CIA, we have, fortunately, because of my experience at Le Bernardin and elsewhere after that, when I came here, I was able to write the seafood class curriculum. And really, as a dean, I was able to also impact the way our chefs were purchasing and teaching the students how to use seafood. And this is something that the CIA is committed to in terms of our sustainability goals as well. While we still have a long way to go, and sometimes we're limited by our curriculum that kind of almost forces us into purchasing things that maybe aren't at the peak of season or just because of their educational value, we really are trying to every day get better at our choices and our sustainable goals. So I hope you enjoy the presentation today. I'm very excited about the transparency presentation, especially because I think that's something that's very, very much needed in the industry. Better labeling, true, just more fraud prevention, because we do see a lot of seafood fraud. So enjoy yourself today, and you're gonna have some really good food too. Thanks.
Thank you, Chef Bruce. All right, so I'm going to bring up the presentation, but if our team from Acme wants to make their way down, they're going to be up next, telling us a little bit about Acme Smoked Fish, a smokehouse that, well, started, I think, in Brooklyn, but is now all over the world. Just put it for you and just see if she might.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Bruce, for having us here today. I'm Brianna Bennett, the Culinary Business Development Chef for Acme Smoked Fish. I'm joined by Alex Golub, our Sustainability Director. We're gonna just briefly talk about Acme's history, our traditions, and how we're trying to lead the seafood industry in innovation and sustainability. So like he mentioned, we are a Brooklyn-based company. We're a four-generation family-owned company since 1906, when our founder, Harry Brownstein, immigrated to the US from Russia. He had a dream of owning and starting a smokehouse, but first he had to start as just a simple wagon fish jobber. There he went from door to door selling the wagon fish to customers by hand. And a few years later, he was able to open our first smokehouse for Acme in Brooklyn, the same location that we're currently at for our corporate headquarters, in 1954 with his son and son-in-law, Reuben Caslow. A few decades later, the third generation of the company wanted to push us beyond the bagel and deli appetizing shops that we had a namesake in and move us into the retail grocery market. So we utilized new technology for packaging. We implemented new food safety measures to get our product into the grocers, start in the tri-state area, but across the nation. And now today, the fourth generation, we focus on those same traditions, and we still try to incorporate new innovations when it comes to our state-of-the-art facilities, our first-in-class food safety measures, and our supporting sustainability practices.
The screen share ended.
All right, so like I said, we're a proud US-based company, but we do have global reach. We currently have 6 manufacturing facilities. 5 of those 6 we smoke out of, and 1 is solely for sourcing and first up processing. We have facilities along the eastern coast of the US, 1 in Brockton, Mass, that focuses on our ahi tuna, cold smoking. We have our original plant in Brooklyn, New York, that does hot smoking. We have a cold smoking facility, which is the largest in the United States at 100,000 square feet in Wilmington, North Carolina. And we have a smaller facility in Pompano Beach, Florida, that also cold smokes. Aside from that, globally, we have a sourcing and first up processing facility in Puerto Montt, Chile. And then we have a completely source smoking manufacturing facility in Otbruck, Denmark. Across those 6 facilities, we're at about 1,100 employees, and annually we smoke 20 million pounds of fish per year. So the Acme brand today has 4 different brands actually under our umbrella. We have our flagship that started in 1906 with Harry. It's one we're most known for by name, that encompasses products in food service and retail. But we also started to incorporate a few other brands to reach different markets to make sure we're reaching all of our customers. The first of those newer ones was the Blue Hill Bay. It is specifically our premium seafood offerings, mostly for food service, but a few in the retail markets. And then we have Ruby Bay, that is a quality and value-driven retail grocery product. And Spence & Co. was our newest brand that focuses on Scottish traditional crafted smoked fish. And our product line spans across about 4 different formats. We have cold smoke, which we're known for with the lox and cold smoke Nova, hot smoke, salads and dips, and then we have herring and a few value-added products. So our cold smoke and hot smoke salmon or fish, they start usually the same. They're hand cured, hand brined, hand trimmed and packed. But the main difference between the two is the temperature that is smoked at. Our cold smoke has to be at 90 degrees Fahrenheit or lower to maintain that silky texture, that buttery texture that is known for. And currently we cold smoke Atlantic salmon, wild caught sockeye, sablefish, and then the ahi tuna. And our hot smoke, we crank up the temperature to 165 degrees or higher. That way we end up with a product that's moist, flaky, like a baked piece of fish. And we hot smoke about 15 to 16 different species, but we're mostly known for our Atlantic salmon, our whitefish that we source from the Great Lakes, and our trout. Another really traditional product that Acme has maintained some classic products in, and we're starting to innovate more in, is our salads and our dips. We're known for our whitefish salad, baked salmon salad, but in the recent years, our R&D team has created newer collabs with Mike's Hot Honey, another local Brooklyn-based company, and we have a Mike's Hot Honey sweet heat dip. And the herring is solely wild-caught pickled herring in a few different flavor varieties, like a curried, a red wine, a spiced. So when Acme first started, as I said, we were in Brooklyn, and what's known in Brooklyn is a bagel. So our dream was to be bagel's best friend since 1906. From there, we were able to be the #1 source of smoked fish for the bagels in the tri-state area. But we also wanted to move that beyond just New York. And now we're the top bagel deli choice across the US. And the same for retailers. We're proudly on the shelves of top national retailers, some wholesalers like Costco and BJ's, as well as some regional favorites like Publix, Harris Teeter, or Albertson. And we were recently named last year one of Whole Foods' top 25 vendors. So just the vision that Harry started this company with, the family makes sure to keep that going. And with that, we continue innovation every day to increase our pipeline every year for new products. And our main goal is to make Acme not only a part of the breakfast meal occasion, but we want to be a part of every part of the dinner table for customers. For breakfast, for brunch, for lunch, dinner, and for snacks with our salmon candy, our lox in the box, our herring. And another huge part of that innovation that our R&D team focuses on is our sustainability practices. And that's where Alex and her team comes in. So I'm just gonna bring up Alex.
Thanks so much, Bree. And thanks everyone for being here and for having us. So I'm the Sustainability Director at Acme, and I'll just, because we're here with Sea Grant, I thought it would be important to highlight some of the initiatives that we've undertaken, particularly in the last 5 years at Acme, to ensure that as we scale, as you saw in Bree's presentation, that we're doing it responsibly. And I think that nothing encapsulates that better than the corporate value that we included a couple years ago called Citizens of Seafood. So Citizens of Seafood at Acme is how we define sustainability. And under that, we really work across 4 pillars. So we're taking a holistic view of sustainability. So of course that starts with our raw material sourcing, right? Making sure that the seafood we purchase has very strict sourcing standards that we feel confident in and that also reflect the requirements of our most discerning customers. We also look at our waste reduction and packaging innovation would fall under that as well. So that's across our CPG, our retail products, as well as our operations at our facilities. We look at our climate impact. We've completed a baseline greenhouse gas assessment several years ago, and we're continuing to measure progress to track reductions there. And then under our people and community pillar, I'll talk about it in a little bit, but we invest heavily in innovation to address climate impacts in the seafood industry. So I think it would be helpful to look at this sourcing map. Bree talked about some of the species that we purchased. So these are our top, I think, 5 or 6 species, and where they're coming from. So this is something that I spend a lot of time on, and we track very heavily at Acme. We're consistently looking for suppliers that meet our sustainability criteria. We have a public sustainable sourcing policy on our website that we update every year to make sure that it's reflective of the progress we're making to source eco-certified seafood. So at Acme, we do rely quite heavily on the Global Sustainable Seafood Initiative, also called GSSI. They publish a benchmark of eco certifications that help businesses like ours, as well as retailers. They don't really, I don't think they've done a great job at penetrating to consumers, but really within the food service and retail market, they help us understand what the standards should be for eco-certified seafood. So our Atlantic salmon that is all farm raised and comes primarily from Chile, but the North Atlantic as well. Our lake whitefish that you'll try today comes from mainly 2 sources in the Great Lakes and Winnipeg. Winnipeg, we've been heavily involved in supporting the establishment of a fisheries improvement project. We've actually worked with the Wisconsin Sea Grant office in the Great Lakes to monitor the Monterey Bay reassessment of those fisheries. So we're really proud to say that they've been reassessed and are green and yellow rated. And our herring is mainly MSC certified, and we have a great source of MSC certified tuna as well for our new cold smoked ahi tuna product. So again, I just wanted to kind of bring this up. We work with a lot of, there are some logos here. We work with both nonprofit NGOs as well as some organizations such as Trace Register to work on traceability. I'm sure you'll hear a lot more from Mike about the FSMA 204 rule, and businesses like ours are definitely subject to creating digital traceability in our supply chains. We're not doing that just because we have to, but our retail customers are certainly requiring it, as well as the federal government. But we also believe that traceability is key to unlocking a lot of the sustainability insights that we really need to understand where our fish is coming from, and ensuring that we feel comfortable in the environmental and social impacts of those fish. And then just the last thing I wanted to highlight is that 4th pillar that I mentioned earlier, people and community. The way that we really embody that at Acme is through a program that we started a few years ago called the Seafood Industry Climate Awards. So we created a foundation called the Acme Smoked Fish Foundation, and 1%, we committed 1% of sales from all Acme branded retail cold smoked salmon products, which is a specific line, but it's our biggest, definitely our biggest bucket of sales. And so 1% of proceeds from those sales go towards supporting the Seafood Industry Climate Awards, where we annually distribute $250,000 in grants across North America and Chile to promising innovators working to reduce carbon emissions across the seafood industry. So we're very proud of that program. I will plug that we have an application cycle opening in September, September 25th during Climate Week. We will launch the next cycle of our Seafood Industry Climate Awards, and we're always looking for exciting innovators. And I will leave it there. We'll open it. I don't know if we have time for questions now or later, but thank you for your attention and for having us.
Thank you, Alex and Brianna. Innovative and very interesting presentation. Any questions? Yeah, Michael?
Hi, my name is Michael Anro. I'm a seafood educator and cook a lot of seafood. But to your point about GSSI not being so forward in traceability with consumers, I agree wholeheartedly. But I wonder if that's an inroads for you, and also wondering with that, are you actually telling the consumer on your packaging what farms you're working with, a Moe or Cermak or True North, some of those? Yeah, I'll stop there. I have another one, but
I think the question was mainly about eco-labeling on our packaging, or
actually telling where you're sourcing your salmon.
got it. Yeah, so we have so the slide that I brought up with our raw material sourcing, that is published on our website. It lives in our annual sustainability report. So we really pride ourselves on our transparency. We also have a separate landing page on our website that talks about our sourcing and our sustainable seafood sourcing policy, which actually includes a scorecard, an annual scorecard of how we did on achieving the standards for certified seafood that we set out, which is an increase year-over-year improvement. That all lives publicly on our website. Because of our business model, we're not doing a lot of direct-to-consumer sales, right? We mainly sell into retail and food service. So it's always kind of unclear like how many consumers are coming to our website and reading those materials. We publish them because we believe in transparency, and also because we want to set an example within the greater seafood industry. So I think it's a really good question as to how much of this information penetrates all the way down to consumers, although our marketing team has taken a lot more initiative over the past couple of years to highlight some of the sustainability work that we're doing and try to package it in a way that consumers can resonate with.
Great. Yeah, I know you guys are doing a great job, but I do wonder how much consumers are asking that. And because I feel like they are asking that. And do we have a handle on it? It would be great to move back to, your marketing people to see if actually the consumers are saying, hey, what farm does that come from? We know that people attach themselves to great companies that are doing great for the planet. And what does that mean? So are they looking at Acme as just, Acme's got a great name? Do they really know that you're doing what you're doing, which is awesome? But for me, teaching people about seafood, I love peeling that onion, and the consumer is the bottom line. So I love peeling the onion and letting them know exactly where the product is. And I wonder, if that's something that's an inroad for y'all to be even that much more on the dime of like, we get this from this farm or that farm. So, we obviously have some problems with some people with farm seafood, but products like yourselves are, to me, an inroads to consumers adapting to the farm seafood as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we'll hear more about traceability efforts, but I think one of the reasons that I'm so optimistic about the work that we're doing on traceability is the ability to unlock some of those insights for consumers. So, for example, there's some commodities that have a QR code on the back of the pack that allow you to see exactly where that product is coming from. And that's something that, we couldn't do several years ago in the seafood industry. With something like farm salmon, it becomes much more possible once we really kind of turn on that technology.
We'll do one more question and then we'll move on to our next. Anybody else have a question for Becky? Yeah.
So thank you for that. I have to say, being from Brooklyn, it's really awesome to see something. I'm being a fisheries biologist by training. I love the fact that this is there and knowing the history and where it's come from, and that I also see you all taking it into the future as well. So I think that's great. So I don't know how much of this is a question, and it's maybe partly for you too, but also maybe for Mike and Kristen too. While we're here in New York at the New York Seafood Summit, there's a lot of seafood that is from New York. So I'm wondering what thoughts are about, obviously it takes resources and that kind of thing, but is there a market potentially for building out some product that's local New York product?
I mean, I think there definitely is. To add on to what you're saying, even more and more today, people do care about where their product or what they're putting in their body is coming from. And we're also always constantly like looking for ways to incorporate local things into our products or source local products. I think it comes with a challenge with how much volume that we kind of produce every year. But if we have an opportunity to source locally, we definitely look for it. It may start small, but hopefully it can gain traction here and there.
So I did want to highlight, you'll see you'll taste our whitefish today, but we also do source and smoke New York bluefish, which in small quantities. And our whitefish comes from, as I mentioned, a variety of sources, but we have a small amount that comes from Lake Erie. It's just kind of mixed in with everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just one little add on, because I know this is all,
Yeah. Yes.
yeah. So, obviously this is all fish, but in New York and other places, also seaweed is growing as a source of things. So maybe there's also in the future thinking about expanding also into some of that. Again, that's resources, that's, all of those things you just said in terms of the challenges, but I can also see the opportunities for figuring out how to work with our industries here in New York and elsewhere to build up some of those more niche and see where they go. But I know that takes resources and time.
I think as a company, we're open to that, and we have still the spirit of our original founder today in our family that owns it. So we're looking to that for the future.
Great. Thank you, Alex and Brianna. All right, so I will invite Nicole Agrina down. Nicole is the CEO of the Fulton Fish Market, new Fulton Fish Market Cooperative, to share more about what's going on there. Let's put on our intros.
Can everyone hear me okay? Oh yeah, that's strong. We just did a rally the other day and our mic wasn't working so well, so I'm used to projecting into this. I won't do that to you guys. So my name is Nicole Acarina. I'm the CEO of the Fulton Fish Market Cooperative located in the Bronx of New York City. First, I want to say thank you to Sea Grant and CIA for inviting me to speak here today. It's quite an honor. It's such a beautiful campus, and we have a message to get out, especially to the future chefs of the world that I'll share at the end. Come visit us. So you may have heard of the Fulton Fish Market because we're the largest seafood distribution center in the United States, or you may have heard of it because we were historically run by the mob. Either way, it typically surprises people to see that I am running the Fulton Fish Market. As you can see, I am a heavily tattooed millennial. What you can't see is that I was born and raised on the South Shores of Brooklyn and Long Island, and that I also have a background in economic development and large-scale infrastructure projects and operations along quite a few waterfronts of the United States. So it's safe to say that I'm more so of a politician and a deal broker for the Fulton Fish Market than I am a fishmonger, even though I have quite a salty soul. I fit in well out there. So the Fulton Fish Market hired me about 2 years ago to do a couple of things. One of which was to essentially make the Fulton Fish Market relevant again. Another was to create a pathway for a sustainable future for the existence of the market, to ensure the future existence of the market in the industry. I hope not to disappoint you, but I'm actually probably not going to speak too much about seafood today, but more so about the history of the market and our relevance to the nation's food supply chain and in food supply policy overall, and about the future of the Fulton Fish Market as well. So the Fulton Fish Market is essentially a middleman, and people often tend to think that you can cut out the middleman. I mentioned that I'm a millennial leader. I came into this role 2 years ago actually thinking that the middleman could be dissolved, and that I would either need to fight to prevent that or figure out how to adapt to the changes in the industry to ensure our survival. But over the last 2 years, something that I've really learned is that in this industry specifically, you can't really cut out the middleman, even with technology. We unload, we process, we scale, we clean, we cut, we package, we reload, we distribute more than 5 million pounds of seafood every week, and our volumes are on the rise yet again. We're looking at volumes equivalent to pre-COVID, and it was tough recovering from COVID, but we're at pre-COVID volumes and they're increasing by the week, which is super exciting for us. The original market was set at the South Street Seaport for about 180 years. We moved to the Bronx 20 years ago into a 400,000 square foot refrigerated warehouse. But the market still carries that classic New York City energy. It's an overnight operation. It consists of 4 to 6 generation businesses. So you got a lot of the old school players that were operating at the old market. But if you walk around and you actually engage with the shareholders of the market, you see that there's an emerging kind of next generation of leadership within a lot of the companies there, as well as the leadership team within the cooperative as well. We employ 1,200 in a city-owned facility run by a co-op of 22 shareholders and containing nearly 30 seafood companies in one of the last remaining public wholesale markets in New York City. I'm gonna say this in the way that the guys at the market would. We've got tuna, we got salmon, we got halibut, we got squid, we got pollock, we got crabs, we got oysters, we got lobster, we got monkfish, shark, ribbonfish, jarfish, eel, urchin, cats and puffers. As they would say again, if you want it, we got it. The market is part of the New York City's primary distribution center in Hunts Point, which also contains the meat market, Baldor, Budweiser, the city's produce market, Citarella, and a bunch of large-scale food distributors for the New York and Northeast region. Because the market is a critical component of the city and Northeast food supply chain, we tend to take an active involvement, especially in the last couple of years, in conversations surrounding food, transportation, and environmental policy matters. So recently, the fish market took a position against offshore wind, specifically Empire Wind, in concern over the condition of the fisheries off the south shores of Long Island. We are kind of petitioning to the president to hear our position to consider squashing the project moving forward. We also took a position as it relates to congestion pricing. We support the program overall. We would love to see a carve out for essential food distribution. And then we also took a really kind of bold position as it relates to the New York City Blue Highway initiative. This is an initiative in New York City that is moving freight back to our waterfront. So about 2 years ago when I joined the market and was exploring different ways to amplify our assets and create new revenue streams, I knew that the future was kind of in our roots and that we needed to activate our waterfront for our survival. So basically, we're going to be embarking on a handful of pilot programs where we are going to start moving seafood from the Bronx to the South Street Seaport. Overall, long term, we would just love to see ships come direct into port. Exploring the logistics of that may not be so feasible, but we're going to test it out to see if we can make it work. Thankfully, the deal as well is structured in a way where we could bring all different products into the lot of the Fulton Fish Market, to include beer, to include all sorts of different products to serve the food distribution peninsula as a means to ensure our future. As you can imagine, being a 400,000 square foot warehouse that only operates overnight, doesn't operate on the weekends, even if you have every single stand full, it can be hard to keep the lights on. The rent is expensive, insurance is expensive. It's tough to hang on. So we're exploring a variety of different initiatives, both within the market to change the use of the market overall as well, and to kind of amplify our sustainability practices. We are quite old school in the way that we operate, and we are changing that with time. So a few more of those initiatives, aside from moving freight to the waterfront to reduce the carbon emissions of it being transported by truck, the city is also deploying a solar array on our roof. So it is going to be a community solar array, providing power to the local neighborhood of Hunts Point and the shareholders of the market. We were also awarded a fleet of electric vehicles, which is super exciting, including the charging infrastructure. So the Fulton Fish Market Co-op is going to be deploying a green fleet in 2026 to serve the New York City region. Separately, we are also in the process of greening our waste streams. Something that we found was that everything was just going in the landfill. Everything was being burned. So we're actually separating everything and going to start compacting and selling our styrofoam, separating our organics for the purposes of things like dog foods and dog treats and cool stuff like that. So we're separating our waste streams in order to both save money and to green our operations as well. We are also looking at about $20 million in renovations to our facilities over the next couple of years. New toll plaza, new drain system, things like that. And then this is kind of the fun part. We're looking at alternative uses. So we have a lot of space, and that space is not utilized a majority of the time of the day of the week. So we're looking to host catering events in the space. We're repurposing some of our longstanding vacancies into a demo kitchen, smart classroom. We would love to partner with academic institutions. So more to chat about. We also recently embarked on an arts program where we partnered with local artists and had, what is it, Lisa, 10 or 12 murals? 12 murals painted across the campus of the Fulton Fish Market. We're looking to kind of beautify the space. When I first started and was seeking kind of feedback from the staff within the market, a lot of the feedback was almost that their workplace feels like an institutional center, and that every day they felt like they were getting up and going to work in a corrections site or something like that. So we're like, we need art. Art's the answer. Then we also created a community development 501c3, Fulton Fish for the Bronx. We have been doing a lot of work and partnering with local community organizations to support their efforts and work, and how it ties into what we do, both from a workforce development perspective and an educational perspective. Last thing I will share is that we give tours, and we would love for everyone in this room to come out for a tour sometime. Please contact Lisa over here and let them know that you are at this event, and I am happy to personally give you a tour, or any one of the students at CIA a tour anytime. We want to see chefs in the building. I think part of there's a lot of stories that you receive when you're kind of engaging with the shareholders of the market, which is one of the coolest things about being in the market. But something that they talk about is that chefs used to engage a lot more directly than they do now. Now, restaurants will have buyers come in. We want to meet the chefs. We want the chefs to actually see the product, feel the product. That's how you really truly learn the value of the products. So we're here, and we would love to see everyone. And that's it for me for now. Thank you. And I'm happy to take questions. And again, thank you for the invitation here today.
Great. Thank you, Nicole.
Here.
Questions?
So one thing that I learned working with all of these folks with Sea Grant and hearing stories from the fishermen, or fisher people, I should say, out in Long Island, is that processing is a challenge. And I know we import so much fish, and yet we have a lot of fish that's coming from our shoreline that, you know, it doesn't get utilized or sold in the most efficient way, in my opinion. So how does it work? Like, do the individual companies that house their businesses at the Fulton Fish Market, do they do their own processing?
Yes.
Now, is it possible that there might be an idea, and I don't know how feasible this is, but if you have this extra space, what about like an aggregator type processor? So somebody who would actually maybe buy the fish at a certain cost and sell it back at a certain cost or something of that nature. I know there's a new food hub in the Bronx. And I was, that food hub that,
Grow NYC,
yeah,
Mhm.
Grow NYC.
they're our neighbor.
And I was wondering, like, that processing aggregate could possibly set up shop there for
Mhm.
like, the public.
Mhm.
I don't know. I had these ideas. And again, I'm first one to admit, I don't know how feasible it is.
Yeah.
My wife tells me all the time that I'm crazy.
I think it's a great idea and something we'd be happy to chat about and explore. Something, when I came in to run the market, I really wanted to optimize the cooperative model and the shared services aspect, only to really find out how enormous the level of competition is within the building. So there are certain things that we can easily centralize, like security, unloading, loading, things like that, because it doesn't impact the competitive dynamic within the market. But certain initiatives and things like that, the ones that I might get voted down by my board are typically the ones that impact the competitive dynamic. For the public, though, I think that's a totally different concept and something that we should definitely explore.
Hi, Nicole. Heidi Raker from Hudson Valley Fisheries. We're the land-based steelhead trout operation in Hudson. And I'm curious, with so much of American seafood consumption coming from foreign sources, what, in your opinion, would it take to get this balance corrected where Americans are consuming more domestic product to help our seafood industry?
It's a really good question. We're trying to wrap our head around what those numbers actually are. So we're kind of increasing the level of data that we're collecting from our shareholders to actually understand what that breakdown is. Historically, we really didn't collect much information beside what was required for billing purposes. So we're trying to understand what that is so we can potentially determine how to make that work. I think from speaking to like New York City specifically, I think the nature of the demand of products is so incredibly diverse that I think we're always going to end up importing products from all over the world. And that's part of, I think, the appeal of going to the Fulton Fish Market, is because you can find anything that you possibly need, not just the local stuff. We consider anything that hits the market's docks same day that it was pulled from the ocean local. So anything basically from Florida that if it hits the market same day, we're considering it local, which is the vast majority of the product that we're selling.
Interesting.
Yeah, I didn't know that until I started either.
Thank you for your presentation. Chris
Sure.
Drago, I'm with the Dutchess County Legislature.
Awesome.
I find the cooperative model really interesting. Could you talk a little bit about the mechanics of that and what the benefits to shareholders are, or also to the parent company?
Absolutely. Yeah. So technically the cooperative runs the leases of the market. So the market cooperative has a master lease with the city of New York. It's a city-owned property. And then the cooperative manages and administers the leases to the shareholders of the market. So the shareholders of the market pay a base rent. And then on top of that, they pay additional fees for shared services. So rather than having to provide or to hire people to do specific things, it's basically included when you participate in the market. The typical model was that you had to buy in, and if you actually purchased your stand, that can range anywhere between $75,000 and $500,000 years ago. Now the demand isn't so great to operate in a public market or wholesale market space as it once was. So now we're looking at different ways to get people in the door without deterring them with such a large kind of upfront purchase. We're looking at more of like a long-term lease model rather than having to buy into it like you once had to, which obviously doesn't make the old school shareholders of the market too happy. But in reality, we have to keep the market full, and we have some vacancies that we're in the process of filling. So basically, the board is made up of shareholders within the market. So every every year the board gets elected, the executive members of the board get elected as well. And they basically oversee the governance and large scale kind of decisions of the market. Let me know if I should keep going. Did I answer? Okay. It's a complex model. I could just keep going.
All right, we got 2 more questions and then we're gonna move on.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Brianna Natsulis. I'm with the North American Marine Alliance and Don't Cage Our Oceans. And I have so many questions for you, and I also have some comments. I'd love to catch up afterwards.
Sure.
Simply have a conversation. So just one comment about, processing in the US and imports and exports. A lot of the fish that we do actually import have been exported for processing and then re-imported. So what we find with the fishing communities that we work with, from Maine to Montauk to to the Gulf to Alaska, what we have found is that what they're really looking for is that processing part, to be able to keep the fish in the US, to be able to process it so that it's not exported and then re-imported.
Yep.
We had led the introduction of a bill last year called the Domestic Seafood Production Act, which actually would have funded processing facilities and waterfront development for certain fishing communities across the US. And that's, again, that's what we hear a lot, is the processing. And then the other thing about the processing, and I love that idea of using some of that space that you have to do processing. The other thing that we've found with some of the land-based aquaculture operations is the issue of fish feed. And where are they getting the fish feed? And is it coming in from other countries? But if you're able to keep the trimmings and then process that to then be used domestically for inland aquaculture operations, I mean, that strengthens the US seafood system so much. I think that's really, really exciting. So to ask you a question. So I am curious, continuing with that idea of the co-op, which is such an empowering model to be able to grow and really support. Do you take directives from your members of what kind of policies or what kind of changes that you want? So going back to this idea of processing, would your members and the board be able to say, look, we need this now, so this is what we're going to do? So what kind of external direction do they offer you outside of the daily running and everything else that's involved with the Fulton Fish Market? Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Thank you. I have a really strong relationship with our board chairman, Richard Klein. I speak to him several times a week. Our board meets quarterly. They hired me to make deals and to be innovative. So basically I bring most ideas to them for approval. That's kind of the way it's been going, at least for the last 2 years. Typically prior to that, the board was kind of running the show more so, but as some folks are kind of aging out of the business and they were looking to take an alternative approach, they are kind of taking my lead and guidance. Sure, they do shoot down some ideas, but for the most part, they've been really open and receptive to what I brought to the table. Yeah, thank you.
Just a quick clarification. When you say the members are processing, are they doing value-added processing or purely just heading, gutting, filleting, trimming?
Primarily the latter. Both, but primarily the latter.
Hi, I represent the New York State Marine Education Association. And when I was very young in high school, I used to go for tours at South Street Seaport and really kind of commiserate with the fishmongers there and learn about fish at that time. I think there's an excellent opportunity to possibly infuse education programs with what you're doing. You're still in New York City, which means that New York City teachers can come and possibly visit if there was a structure like that set up. And then also, I thought I once saw a cooking demonstration on television that were being done at the fish market. And I thought that was so clever because it was like education on television. You didn't even have to go. Additionally, we run monthly Zooms in anything marine related. And so we would love to have you talk on Zoom to our constituency. And I think just by talking about what you do down there, up there, actually, and what goes on in the fish market would induce people to eat more fish. And it would also create a number of other positive things. So teachers would be able to learn either on Zoom or come and visit with their class if that were possible. And so just starting at some kind of education program could be of great value and great opportunity.
I love the idea. That's kind of the motivation behind we want like a classroom space, like a specific classroom space, because we've gotten a fair amount of requests, especially over the last couple of years, for people wanting to come in and teach. From a demonstration point of view, we do have a show that's launching from the market. Michael Ann here is a seafood educator, and she's launching her show that will be filmed at the market. What is it, launching in September? October, yes. But we're building a lot more programming with that exact kind of goal in mind, is to educate folks. I mean, it's kind of one of the last pure proteins that we have available to us. So we need to educate folks about how to cook it and the fact that it's accessible. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Please do come visit.
Bree and Alex are going to be here for our networking and social. Yep. All right. So they'll be around. If you have questions, find them out in the lobby while you're eating and snacking. But we're going to move on. I'm up next. So I'm going to bring up my presentation and get started. We're a little bit behind, so I'm going to talk a little bit fast. But if I'm going too fast, please tell me. And I'm happy to slow down. But I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Food Safety and Modernization Act's preventive or traceability rule. So Section 204 of the Food Safety and Modernization Act. Show of hands, who knows what this is? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. All right. So it's new for many of you. Looked like it was new for many of our chefs too, which is good. All right, so the Food Safety and Modernization Act, or FSMA 204, is, let me get that good one. All right, the FDA's final rule implies additional requirements for additional traceability record requirements for certain foods. So key terms there, one is additional, so it doesn't negate any traceability requirements that currently exist and are in place. It's an addition to those. And two, it only applies to certain foods, and we'll get into kind of what foods those are. This establishes traceability record keeping requirements for anyone who manufactures, processes, packs, holds, or any foods that are on that food traceability list. So those certain or specific foods. So the intent of this rule and why we have this rule coming into play is that this requirement, new requirements identified in this rule are ultimately meant to allow for faster identification and more rapid removal of potentially contaminated foods from US markets, ultimately resulting in a decrease in the number of foodborne illness outbreaks and deaths that we see annually. Currently, FDA estimates that without a lot code or an ID to source that food back to where it came from, it takes approximately 35 days for them to complete an investigation and pull potentially contaminated foods from the market. They estimate that with implementing this rule and the requirement of this lot code, they can reduce that down to 6 days, which is approximately an 83% reduction in the time it takes to pull potentially contaminated food from the market, ultimately reducing that illness occurrence and potential for death. So what foods does this actually apply to? Again, they went through assessing the different foods based on risk, and they came up with a list of foods that were going to be required to follow these additional traceability requirements. Now you'll see there's a lot of foods on this list. The ones I have highlighted here on your right are the ones that are seafood, right? We're here to talk about seafood. So my focus is going to be on those seafood products, but that list is available online. It's up there. You can see what products are there. You also need to keep in mind what form those products are in, because it notes what form those products are covered under this list. So if you work with those products under a different form, in a different form, they're actually not on that list and do not have to comply with these requirements. So you'll see when it comes to fish, we've got fin fish that are prone to histamine, fin fish that are susceptible to ciguatoxin poisoning, and then fin fish that are not associated with histamine or ciguatoxin. So ultimately, if you're working with fin fish, it's on this list. So all fin fish is subject to the traceability rule. We also have smoked fin fish. So any smoked product subject to that traceability rule, because you'll see as we go through, there's kill steps and further processing can actually take these products off the list. Smoked does not apply. Crustaceans, so any crustaceans, they're on the list. Mollusc and shellfish are on that list, but there's also an exemption for them. So we'll get a little bit into the exemptions as well. But also you'll see that in all cases, it's fresh, frozen, or previously frozen. So any fish in that fresh, frozen, or previously frozen state, right, is subject to this new traceability requirement. So I mentioned there are a lot of exemptions to this rule, and who does not have to actually keep these records, maintain these records, and pass these records along. So for today, since we're really focusing more on those culinary food service establishments as well as restaurants, I highlighted the ones that are most applicable to those entities. But there are exemptions for retail food establishments and restaurants based on the size. Can't see that, can you? All right. There's restaurant exemptions if you're purchasing directly from the producer. So if you're purchasing directly from the farm, right, there's that exemption because you'd ultimately know the source of that product because it's coming direct from that farm. And lastly, there are restaurants purchasing from food or other retail food establishments on an ad hoc basis. That's also exempt. So we'll get a little bit more into those size exemptions. But when it comes to seafood, there's also so many farm exemptions. There's fishing vessel exemptions. So there's a lot of different exemptions. And that's what makes this rule really complicated, is kind of identifying and determining whether or not you actually need to comply and what parts you need to comply with. There is an exemptions tool. So you'll see on the bottom right of this slide, there's a link. I will be sharing all those presentations as a PDF with active live links. So you can access all these after, and you can go through that tool. But it's a series of questions that you answer that ultimately spits out you're exempt or you are not, and you need to comply with the rule. So as far as other exemptions we talked about, there are obviously size-based exemptions, because this would be very difficult for some of our smaller businesses to really comply with the requirements of this rule. So for anyone producing raw agricultural commodities, which seafood is considered a raw agricultural commodity prior to being processed, with sales of less than 25,000 are exempt. Any retail food establishments or restaurants that have sales of less than 250,000 are exempt are exempt from this rule. There's another exemption for this electronic sortable spreadsheet. So that's another requirement within the rule, that you must provide the FDA upon request within 24 hours or another agreed upon time with an electronic sortable spreadsheet. So something like an Excel spreadsheet where they can easily sort through the different products that you've received in that facility. There's an exemption to that requirement, right, for farms with less than 250,000 and restaurants and retail food establishments that make less than $1 million. So they don't need to have that data in that digital format, but they do still need to have that data if they are required to follow that rule. So as far as compliance, so the original compliance date for this rule was January 20th of 2026, with routine enforcement that was meant to start 1 year later. In March of this year, FDA actually announced that they were extending the deadline by 30 months. So that puts us in about July 20th of 2028. So there's still quite a lot of time for folks to comply with this rule, which is great because a lot of you didn't even raise your hand and were not aware that this rule was coming into play and the additional requirements that this would impose on many of the various businesses along the seafood supply chain, including restaurants and food service establishments, right? So we're here to kind of introduce this rule and these requirements so that you can start to prepare, because the key here is really collaboration and communication across the supply chain, because you're relying on your buyers and in your suppliers to transfer this information in a way that you can then format it for FDA upon request. So what are the basic requirements of our traceability rule? First, facilities must establish and maintain a traceability plan, and we'll talk about what that includes. They also must maintain records that contain key data elements for specific critical tracking events that are defined through that rule, and we'll talk about both of those as well. They're also required to provide FDA with that electronic sortable spreadsheet, right, upon request or within 24 hours or a reasonable time that is agreed upon with the agency, right? Those are the main basic requirements. So it seems fairly simple, but it's quite a complicated rule with all the exemptions and all the different nuances of getting this data and information through that supply chain. So one requirement was that traceability plan. Any facility or operation that is subject to the traceability rule, so is not exempt and is working with a product on that traceability list, must establish and maintain a traceability plan, which includes the record-keeping procedures within their facility, how they're going to maintain these records, what their process is for identifying any of the foods that they have in their facility that are actually on this food traceability list, how they're going to assign traceability lot codes. So that's if applicable, and we'll get into that because not every entity within that supply chain is going to need to create and assign a lot code, right? There's only certain critical tracking events that require the creation of that lot code. You're going to have to include the point of contact within your facility for that traceability plan. So who can they contact if they have questions or concerns about the traceability efforts? For farms, you're going to need a map of the farm itself and the areas in which you're growing foods, if applicable. So I mentioned those 7 critical tracking events. So these are those key events within the supply chain where you are required, right, to keep specific data points or data elements associated with that event. There are 7 critical tracking events in total, including harvesting, cooling, before initial packing. That does not apply to seafood. Initial packing, first land-based receiver, which is the main seafood for wild capture, shipping, receiving, and transformation. So those are the 7 events where you would have to keep these key data elements and pass those through the supply chain. You'll also note the yellow stars on a few of these critical tracking events. Those are the 3 critical tracking events that require the creation of a lot code. So unless you are involved in one of those 3 critical tracking events, you do not need to worry about creating or generating those lot codes. You will be responsible for receiving and passing those lot codes along as that product moves through the supply chain though. The QR code here and that shortened URL will take you to another FDA document that outlines all of these 7 critical tracking events, as well as the key data elements associated with each of them, which I have a screenshot of right here, again, showing which have those traceability lot codes. And you'll see that once you click on the tab for the specific critical tracking event of concern or that you're working under, it lists all of the key data elements that you'd be responsible for maintaining, collecting, and potentially passing through. So the other thing to note here is that on some of these, there'll be 2 different key data element categories. One for if you're purchasing or sourcing product from somebody who is subject to the traceability rule, and a separate one for those who are not. So if you're purchasing from someone who's exempt from the traceability rule, it also gives you some guidance as to what key data elements you should be collecting from them. Right. So we talked a lot about these traceability lot codes. That's really key to this rule, and all of this product moving through that supply chain is going to have to come along with this traceability lot code that can quickly bring FDA back to the source of that product after a last major transformation or a higher risk event. The traceability lot code is essentially a descriptor, often alphanumeric, used to uniquely identify a traceability lot within the records. This is just an example from some of FDA's resources as to how one might create a traceability lot code and the different kind of ways you can do that, whether it's company names, production lots, randomized numbers, but you need to be able to kind of trace that back. They also require the traceability lot code source be provided with all traceability lot codes. And that traceability lot code source is essentially who created that traceability lot code, right? So the business or entity that created that. They also give you the option of using a source reference, which means if you don't want the name of your facility and address going through the supply chain and being seen by others, you can use this reference that FDA has access to and can ultimately identify your business, but others within that supply chain will not be able to without that additional information. And there are more traceability lot code examples if you follow the link there on the bottom. So now I want to just look at some examples of supply chains and how the traceability rule is actually impacting different players within that chain. So this example is for wild caught tuna. You have your fishing vessel, which is fully or partially exempt, and then everything else is in this blue box. Everyone in that blue box is subject to the rule and is required to have a traceability plan, right? So everyone other than that fishing vessel must comply with the traceability rule, must have a traceability plan, and then they are involved in various critical tracking events and need to keep the key data elements associated with each of those critical tracking events. So if we move through the supply chain, we have our first land-based receiver of the wild caught tuna. They're going to keep those first land-based receiver key data elements, and then they're going to keep and maintain the shipping KDEs associated with that shipping critical tracking event. The processor is they're going to keep receiving KDEs. They're then transforming that product, processing that product. They're going to now need to create a new traceability lot code because that's a new transformed product that requires the development of a new traceability lot code. And then they're going to ship that to the distributor. So they're going to keep those shipping KDEs as well, right? And that new traceability lot code is what will go back to the receiving distributor in the next round of data. So for our distributor, they're going to have those receiving KDEs, and then they're going to have shipping KDEs when they send that back out, ultimately ending up at the retail food establishment or the restaurant, who is going to need to maintain those receiving key data elements associated with that product they're bringing into the facility. So what specifically are these receiving key data elements that they're going to have to keep? So for receiving, you need to have the traceability lot code. So again, this is not a code that you yourself assign, but it should come in with your product, and you need to make sure that you're getting that information from your buyer or supplier if you're working with any product that's on this list. You need to have the quantity and unit of measure, so the amount received, pounds or cases, a description of the product that's being received, the location description of the previous source. So ultimately, who is selling you that product? Where is it coming from or being shipped from? You need the address of that location. Also, the location description of receipt, which is essentially where that product is being received. So ultimately, the restaurant where that product is coming in. The date received, the traceability lot code source, so who created that traceability lot code. Ultimately, at this receiving step, it would not be you, so you need to indicate on those records who actually created it. And then the reference document is simply just the type of document that you're housing this information in. But those are the key data elements that a restaurant or food service establishment would need to maintain within their facility for this product. And the record keeping requirements are for 2 years, so they need to maintain these records for 2 years. Here's another example of another supply chain. This is a canned salmon example. We again are getting wild caught salmon from a partially or fully exempt fishing vessel. We then sell this to our first land-based receiver, right? That individual is required to have a traceability plan and keep records of first land-based receiver KDEs for that critical tracking event, and the shipping KDEs, which they then send to a seafood processor who's going to do the canning of that product. That canner is going to have receiving KDEs, but after that, they don't have to keep any other records because they're transforming that product to a form that is no longer on the traceability list. So that rule no longer applies for the rest of the supply chain as this canned tuna moves through that supply chain because it's no longer on that list. Yep, frozen, fresh, or previously frozen. So once you can that product, it's no longer on the list and you do not need to keep these records. I will note that one thing that we are seeing, this only applies to certain foods, but large corporate retailers, food service, they're not interested in doing it for some and not others. So there's a lot of pushback in just requiring this for everything. So don't be surprised if you have canned tuna and you have a distributor or an establishment that's asking for all of this information for that product, even though it's not on the list, because they don't want to pick and choose. So we've seen that a lot. And I think that might be a big part of why it was delayed, in that giving time for people to really just communicate across the supply chain and figure out exactly how they're going to manage these requirements. All right, so here's another supply chain example. Here's one where everybody within that supply chain is subject to the rule and must have a traceability plan. You start with that aquaculture farm. That harvest event is a critical tracking event, whether it's done by the farm or a third party that's coming in and harvesting, but that harvester is responsible for keeping those harvesting key data elements. You then move to the processor, you have initial tracking key data elements and shipping key data elements. Distributor has those receiving and shipping key data elements, and then ultimately gets to that restaurant or food service establishment where you need to keep those receiving KDEs again. So in summary, when we're preparing, as we go to prepare for FSMA 204, we want to first figure out what foods we have on the traceability list, but also talk to your buyers to determine if they're going to require you to do this, regardless of whether your foods are on the traceability list or your suppliers. Determine if you are exempt. So using that exemption tool to figure out if you're an exempt entity or if you need to comply with all parts of this regulation. You then need to identify which critical tracking events you're actually engaging in within your operation. You can then figure out which key data elements you need to keep associated with the different critical tracking events. And then you can develop and implement that traceability plan. But key here, as I've said many times, is communication across the supply chain, right? You're going to need information and you're going to need it in a format that you can easily, say, incorporate into your digital tracking spreadsheet. So if you're collecting that data digitally from them, does their software speak to yours? Is it in a format that you can utilize in yours? Are you using the same software? So these are very key things that need to be worked out between the different players within that supply chain to really make sure that this data can easily and efficiently go from one part to the next. I've got a lot of additional resources that I've linked here. So there's lots of things going on with traceability. There's a lot of FDA, all the tools I've talked about are on there. There's also some seafood specific resources through the National Fisheries Institute. So they've been doing a lot of work in the traceability space because a lot of their clients are heavily impacted by this rule, and acknowledging that there is this requirement for working across the supply chain, even with those who are not clients of theirs. They've created a lot of publicly available resources to help different players within the industry so that we can really start working towards easily getting this data from one point in the chain to the next. So again, this will be shared as a PDF. All these will be clickable active links that you can access, peruse if you have time, but we'll continue to provide resources and updates as needed. If you have questions about traceability, feel free to ask. We've got lots of contacts in the space working to try and support and get the industry up to speed on the changes that are coming, which now we have time to work on since it's 2028 when this is going to be fully implemented and enforced. So that, are there any questions? Yep.
I was actually grilled by a gentleman who's living in Ireland most of the year, going to school over there. And he was asking me about something I think is very similar to this, except he said they drill down so deep that the server can tell you all the steps from the boat to the plate. Is that how detailed this is going to be, or is that like a little less than that?
No. So, and that's another, I think, common misconception of this. In those receiving KDEs at the restaurant, you will not necessarily have access to the boat or the farm information, because that information was in those first land-based receiver KDEs. But if you know, it's not in the KDEs you receive as the receiver. So the FDA will be able to trace back. And the idea is, instead of going through those distributors and everyone else in that supply chain, they can jump back to whoever created that traceability lock code. And if you saw in all those examples, there was usually only 1 or 2 instances of that lock code being created. So they can skip everybody in the supply chain in between the creation of those codes. But the data from the start is not going all the way through to the end. So no.
So we won't be reaching that level, but we'll still be having more traceability to assist with.
And this traceability is not necessarily consumer level traceability. This is purely FDA for reducing foodborne illness and outbreak and their ability to reduce the time it takes for them to pull contaminated product from the market. So the intent of this rule was not to increase visibility to consumers as to where your seafood was coming from. It's to, how do we make it easier and quicker for us to pull contaminated product from the market?
But is there a way, like if I did a search on the FDA website, I put in the lot code, can I get that information? Because the thing is, I'm hoping at some point, if I was a restaurant chef, right? I'm hoping I could tell, look, this guy's telling me it's like Florida red snapper, but I think it was from Costa Rica. Can I tell that?
Unfortunately, you probably wouldn't be able to get that information, right? That's not, and that was a big issue for the industry, is not having all of their public information out there. So it's not, again, it's not meant for that.
I understand, but
Yeah.
but since this is all happening, I mean, there could, that's what I would think.
Yeah. We work with your buyers, your suppliers, and see what information they're willing to share and what they can get.
Will the distributor have one?
Depends on where they are in the supply chain.
Because all it looked like to me is that they were gonna have the same KDs as I do, plus the shipping.
But it depends on where they are in the supply chain.
Right.
But also keep in mind that the creator of that traceability lock code can use that reference, which means it might just be a website that's locked and only FDA has access to. So they don't have any information on the source. All they know is this is how you, FDA, can find the source, right? So it's traceability for the food safety purposes and for reducing risk. It's not traceability for letting everybody know exactly where their fish is coming from. I mean, it's creating some of the infrastructure to better handle that. But again, the FDA is not requiring that information to go through the supply chain. Buyers, industry can use it for that. They can decide to include that information, but FDA is not requiring it because FDA is only doing safety. So industry can take that initiative. You have a comment, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, this is, maybe laying the groundwork for better technology that industry can use down the line to increase some of that boat to plate transparency. We're at Acme, we're certainly interested in unlocking the capability of having that technology in place, but ultimately it comes down to relationships with our suppliers in order to really understand where our fish is coming from in that part of the supply chain. But also to your point earlier, Mike, about the extension at Acme, at least from some of our key retail customers, we have heard that they are still on track for the initial deadline of January 20th, 2026. So I think I was at a presentation at the Boston Seafood Show in March where Wegman said, we understand that the deadline has been pushed, but at Wegmans, we expect this information to come from our suppliers by the January 2026 deadline. So some retailers have been, gunning on this for a while and, are expecting compliance sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and a lot of them were geared up and ready for that January 20th launch. So they're, not waiting on that. Yeah, understandable. And again, that comes back to also a lot of those larger retailers who have been preparing for this, getting the systems in place, are also not interested in picking and choosing which commodities they actually apply these requirements to and are looking to just apply it to all. Questions? Any other question in the back?
Thank you. Too bad the USDA and the FDA can't coordinate and extend country of origin labeling into all of this effort that they're committed to. But just a quick question, and you may have said it, and I'm sorry if I missed it. Why are the boats either fully or partially exempted? Is that because it is an FDA and it's outside of their jurisdiction, or was there some NFI kind of influence? Thank you.
So I don't know the real answer because not FDA. I don't know why they made that decision, but I would guess that because what they need to know from the boats is the name of the boat and where that product was harvested from. And they require that first land-based receiver to collect that information from the boat, and therefore they don't need the boat to tell them they're going to have the land-based. So it's almost like seafood HACCP. I don't know if you're familiar with how seafood HACCP works. Fishermen, producers, they're exempt, but it's the individuals purchasing their product who are responsible for what happens on the farm or on the vessel and ensuring that there's nothing that would make that product unsafe happening there. So even though they're exempt, they still must comply, and that's enforced by their buyers, right? And so most likely that's a similar situation here. There's no need in putting this onus on the vessels. They just need to give that information to the first land-based receiver, and we already have that information, right? So they're exempt. They don't need a traceability plan, but the data that they need to go through to that first land-based receiving step is coming from those vessels. Yep. Any other question? All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We're going to transition now into Chef Bruce's demonstration with monkfish. While he is doing that, I'm going to pull up a presentation. It's just going to cycle through some information on monkfish. So you feel free to peruse, learn a little bit more. And then again, we will have more of this information, and I'll share this after.
You're going to control demo? Awesome.
Oh, you won't? Oh, Bruce, they won't be able to see
I'm
it,
going to be working like,
right? Because it's just him.
yeah, she has the cameras. She has cameras. Cameras that are going to face here. Oh, you're going to still have a present. Oh, we're going to have to kill the presentation for now. Hey, Carolyn. How you doing? I'm on? Wait. Can you all see this yet? You can. Okay, I can't see it here. This is a monkfish. Now, I gotta be honest with you. I never cut the head off a monkfish before. I know how to do it, but the reason why is that who would typically pay for this if it was by the pound, right? If I said, okay, it's only $2 a pound, I'm looking at this fish and I'm saying, what do you think, George? 40% yield, maybe? Maybe 40% yield. Now, granted, right here, there is cheek meat. And there is a company called Red's Best up in Massachusetts. And they're good, they're really nice company, and they like go and harvest all of these, and skate cheeks, and every once in a while you could get them. But typically, when these are brought on the boat, these are just cut off and thrown back in the water. And it's only these big tails that we get as the market form. Now, a monkfish in French I mentioned is called lot. It's also called devilfish sometimes. And it's also called anglerfish. And the reason why it's called anglerfish is, see these? When this monkfish kind of burrows down into the sand stealthily, and it puts up these little wisps and shakes them a little bit. And when a fish comes, it gobbles them right up. And believe me, that mouth, that could swallow some big ass fish, right? Okay. Hole, what's that? Oh, okay, okay. Okay. Fortunately, this one's dead. Although what it did cut me before. One of the teeth punctured my finger. But I forgave it because I knew evidently very soon I was going to cut it up. They took my knives. You guys take my knives? Both knives? What about the bony knife? It's still out there? Oh, it is? Oh, it is. Sorry. Okay. So I'm going to cut this guy. And what I'm going to do is flip him over first. It gives me a clearer picture of where to cut him. Now this has been gutted. You see that? Now, if I look inside, basically, if I cut this open, I exposed the two fillets that normally you see. So then all you got to do is kind of take your knife and go right down along the cartilage. This is not a bony fish. This is a cartilaginous fish. So other cartilaginous species, skate, shark, right? But there's really no bones here. I'm going to just cut this tail as close to that center cartilage as possible. And then all I really have to do here is cut this top and cut this one at its top. And then I could really just pull these out, these two fillets, pull them right out. Now, besides those two little cheeks that I'm not going to bother taking out in the essence of time, in the interest of time, really I have these two fillets and this is all trash. So as you can see, maybe 30% yield, right? I'm going to put this to the side. Oh, okay. So monkfish spawn from February to October. Females release large eggs that contain more than 1 million, like many other fish. They eat whatever is available, but they eat usually they're predatory. So they're eating good stuff, which makes them taste good. Fish that eat well taste well, right? So they typically wait for like little fish or shrimp or anything to swim by. They don't care, and they eat it. They live on the ocean floor on sand, mud, and shell, pretty much ground fish. You could find them up to 3,000 feet down. And like I said, they're lazy as hell. They don't do much. They just wait. They're opportunists. They wait for food to come along. Anyway, okay, enough with the stats. I'm going to show you how to clean a fillet now. Now the fillet, when we get monkfish fillet, it's usually in this form. That doesn't mean, like, a lot of times when you get fillet, you can use it all, you know, but still you have to trim some of this because there's some nasty stuff here. There's like connective tissue. So you take a little bit off, and then what's exposed is almost like this bloodline that comes right down, right? So what I do is I typically pinch that and I slide my knife down and I slide it this way, taking out the bloodline. Then what I could see clearly is the rest of this gray material. So I take this and now I use the knife sideways and I just kind of peel this off. It's very similar to cutting a lot of meat, to be honest with you. You take like silver skin off of a beef tenderloin. It's kind of the same way. And that's pretty clean. Then you take a look this way and you say, oh, that's pretty clean too. But one thing I wanted to show you, I don't know if you could see it, but every once in a while, you find a parasite in these, and it's Anisakis spiralis. It's a little tiny worm, and it's a cod worm. You find them in cod as well. If you eat them, it's not gonna hurt you once it's cooked, but we try to always get it out. Now, you could do some candling if you want. We have light boards that, like a board that has a very strong fluorescent light. You could, once you get them clean like this, you could put it on top and see kind of through it. Or with monkfish, unlike cod, really they usually lie at the surface. So you really could see if there's any there. In this case, there really isn't. So what I'm gonna do, for the demo purposes, I'm gonna cut a nice piece about yay big, okay? Now, I'm going to do a dish that I'm loosely calling monkfish saltimbocca. Saltimbocca is typically usually a veal cutlet. Some people do it with pork, but it's like a veal cutlet with a leaf of sage, prosciutto on top, lightly pounded, dredged usually in flour, sauteed. Sometimes mushrooms are added. There is some Marsala wine usually, and a little bit of a brown demi-glace sauce. And that's the dish. Saltimbocca means jump in the mouth. And typically that's in reference more to the sage than anything else. But one thing you don't want to do when you're making something with prosciutto is add salt, because prosciutto has much more salt. So all I'm going to do on this is put a little piece of pepper, right? And then I have some prosciutto here. I'm actually not going to cut it into medallions, but I'm going to lay down my prosciutto into like a sheet, probably about 4 slices. Slightly overlapping. Monkfish used to, now it's a, Kristen, it's a targeted catch, but it used to not be, right? It was bycatch. Right. So it was like bycatch and it would be sold off. It was not, there wasn't what you might call a reliable supply of it. It was just in case they got it and you'd be able to buy it. So a lot of these fish, you know, they weren't celebrated. Have you ever heard monkfish called poor man's lobster? Why is that? Anybody? What's that? What'd you say? Glad you said that. Similar texture, definitely not similar flavor, right? But yes, similar texture. I don't think anything should be called poor man's anything or like kind of marketed in that way. I think it should just be celebrated pretty much for what it is, you know? But hey, whatever works. So I'm going to take this fillet, I'm going to just wrap it with the prosciutto. Now I cheated. You're not going to have this, but I did cheat and made a little polenta just to plate up with, just to show you an accompaniment for it. Just going to put that off to the side. Now, saute. I don't want to get so much. You know, it's hard. George could probably wake up, George. Oh, George and Carolyn and Aaron could probably attest that I'm much too wordy because I'm like an educator and like you feel like you have to give all the information, but I'm going to try not to do that, okay? So, but when you saute, which is what I'm going to do, or pan sear, it's basically high heat with just a little bit of fat of some kind. I'm going to use a little bit of olive oil in my pan. And I'm going to turn it up a little. Now, what I also have going in this dish, I have mushrooms, I have some shallots, I have sage, I have Marsala wine, and I have some demi-glace that I'm also going to heat up. Now, you might say, why demi-glace, right? Oh, well, I don't have to heat it actually. Why demi-glace? It's a meat-based sauce. Monkfish goes really well with meat flavors. I mean, I'm putting prosciutto on this. It's a type of fish, I'd say monkfish, halibut, even salmon are species that go pretty well with meat flavors. Years ago, when I worked at Le Bernardin, there was a dish that we used to make with monkfish called matelote. And this is an old classic French dish that was typically originally made with conger eel. But we take pieces of monkfish like this and we tie them up and we would marinate them in red wine, a little bit of red wine vinegar, cloves, allspice, bay leaf, star anise, and they would pick up a little bit of a red tinge, right? And then that marinade, we'd eventually reduce that marinade all the way down, put some demi-glace and some fish stock on it and reduce it down to get a base sauce like I have there. When that dish got called to cook, we had a little piece like this. We would pan roast it, and then we would slice it, put it on a plate, put the sauce around, put some fresh buttered noodles in the center, handmade, of course, with chives and little pieces of bone marrow poached, one piece on each of the medallions of monkfish. So I got a nice hot pan now. I'm going to put seam side down, right? I'm going to cut down my heat just a bit, right? Because I want to get this guy cooked too. Now, polenta, let's talk a little bit about polenta. Polenta is just cornmeal. And you all know what polenta is, but 40 years ago when I went to school here, I had no idea. It was my first introduction. And we made like polenta with this unbelievable ragu of meats and stuff. And I said, oh, wow, cornmeal could do all that? And even today, I know how much cornmeal costs, which is not much. But if somebody makes me an unbelievable dish in a restaurant with polenta, I'll gladly pay $30 for it, no problems. Why? Even though I know it only costs a couple of bucks to put that on the plate, because it was made good. And I'm paying for the skill and the experience. I don't necessarily care. I'd rather pay $30 for an excellent polenta with a little bit of ragu than a mediocre lobster dinner. You know what I mean? Brianna's saying, yeah, you know me too, Bruce. I'm like, stay away. Because she's a chef. We're all kind of the same, nuts. You gotta be a little nutty. Anyway, just for your own information, it's a couple of ways you can make polenta. We make firm polenta and we make soft polenta. I'm a soft polenta guy typically. But what do you think? There's a one-word answer to this. What do you think the difference is between making firm polenta and soft polenta? The technique. What's the one difference? Ratio is the difference. So the ratio for firm polenta is like 2 to 3 parts liquid to 1 part cornmeal. And this is when you're using like coarse cornmeal like I am, which takes about 40 minutes to cook. And then for soft polenta, it's 4 to 5 to 1. So that's the biggest difference. See how nice this is getting? Nice color, right? And now it's plumping up. So the prosciutto, we didn't need to tie it because the prosciutto is kind of shrinking on there, you know, and making it nice and round and together. So I'm going to push this off to the side a little, but keep it cooking in the pan. And I'm going to add a little bit of shallots. And I'm going to add my mushrooms in there. Now my mushrooms are maitake mushrooms, which is a cultivated version of what we have locally here at the end of September called hen of the woods mushrooms that grow at the base of oak trees. Last year, I harvested 80 pounds of those guys. Did I ever give you guys mushrooms? I give your parents mushrooms. So I typically harvest forage for mushrooms all the time, and then I sweat them. I don't brown them like I'm doing today, but I sweat them. I cook them with a little bit of oil, butter, salt, and pepper till they're soft, and then I vacuum pack them and freeze them. Then when I need them, I defrost them and I get them crisp on very hot fire. And if I want to add garlic or anything, I do it at the last minute. You guys follow all that? Brianna, you got that? So I'm getting these. Now the mushrooms, when you cook, my students, one thing I know about my students that I taught here at the Culinary, if there's anything they remember about me, It's that I'm really fussy when it comes to cooking mushrooms. I'm very fussy because mushrooms are 90% liquid. What you want to do is always use a very hot pan because they're not going to burn. But what you don't want to happen is you don't want liquid to start coming out of the mushrooms because it's too low heat and they start to boil. You want like it's synchronized where the liquid comes out and immediately it's evaporating so you could get the browning or what we call Maillard reaction on the mushroom. It is not caramelization because that is to do with sugar. But with starch and protein, it's more Maillard reaction. So now I have this beautiful monkfish that's seared. I'm going to take that guy out. I'm going to just have it rest. And it's going to rest and it's going to carry over cook. And then I'm going to continue to brown my mushrooms. And I'm going to add my Marsala wine. And possibly get that to flame. Doesn't have to flame. But what's going to happen is the alcohol cooks off very quickly. And that's what you want to do. And you want to reduce it a little. What it does also, it deglazes the pan. It picks up any of the brown fond, we call it, that's stuck to the pan. And then when it's almost reduced out, I would add my base sauce. And you're going to taste this up there. And I'm going to bring that to a simmer. And then often the last thing we do, especially in French cooking, is what we call monter au beurre or mount with butter. I have a little bit of whole butter here. Aaron, you listening? Monter au beurre. Monter au beurre. And when you add whole butter to a sauce or to anything, you want to kind of move it around all the time, because you want that butter to emulsify into the sauce. If I just let that melt, the fat and the water will separate. And I might end up with like some greasy butter on top. So as soon as that's done now, I want to turn that off because I don't want to continue to cook it till it either over reduces or it separates. The butter kind of comes out of it. So now I'm ready to plate up. The last thing I got to do is put my sage in. And the sage I wait till the end because I want it to have that zap when you bite into it. Now the cut of the sage is what we call a chiffonade or a very, very thin julienne. And you don't want to cut your herbs ever too thin or too fine, because you'll just swallow them. If you're going to use herbs, you have to use them intentionally. And you cut them to a certain level where it'll catch between your teeth and some of those essential oils will be pressed out and it'll perfume your mouth. That's like, you have to think as a chef, we have to think about intentionally about everything that we're adding and how it's going to contribute to the dish. So now that we have pretty much everything in there, I'm going to add a little parsley into the polenta and mix that up and add some cheese into the polenta. Now, how many of you have heard no cheese in Italian? No cheese with seafood, right? No cheese. Do you eat cheese with seafood, Chris? Denise does. My wife's Italian. She does it. She doesn't care. We used to go to this restaurant and the waiter, he'd say, "You like some cheese?" He said, "I would not recommend." And she'd say, "Yeah, bring it to me." He said, "Why not? It's a free country." And it's always been like our little joke, because I don't usually have cheese with seafood. But in this case, I would, because I have all this meat flavors and stuff. It would be no issue whatsoever. So I'm going to take a little polenta. This is local polenta from Wild Hive, right? Wild Hive. Yeah. And then I'm gonna take my nice monkfish and my knife. I'm gonna cut this a little tiny bit off the end here. Then I'm gonna cut this on a bias. And you see that doneness? That's what you're looking for. Just a little bit translucent in the center. I'm gonna put that on the plate. Then I have my sauce. Messy, but good food is messy. And again, you see this parsley is not too fine. It's like a chiffonade again, so you could cut it. And there we go. And that's it. Simple? How simple? Pretty easy, right? Who can't do that? It's what I like to say. Excellent. So Michael, you could do what you got to do.
Is the recipe written down?
I'll send it to you guys to post.
All right. All right, last call for questions for Chef Bruce.
Do you think I have a recipe? Yes or no?
No. All right.
My mantra
What was
is technique, recipe inspired, technique driven.
This came from, do you know the vessel it came from? Not vessel. Lobster Place is where we got it out of the city. But it is New York monkfish. All right, so for our last activity for today, it's our networking resource fair, but also we'll have an oyster shucking competition. We've got 3 students lined up from the CIA who are going to be shucking out in the foyer. So I want to give one last thank you to all of our speakers, Alex, Brianna, Nicole, Chef Bruce, for coming up and sharing with us today. Again, these were all recorded. They'll be on our website, and we encourage you to share those. If you think one of these talks would be of interest to anybody else, please do feel free to direct them there or share those links. We also, on the little agendas that are out by the sign-in sheet, there is a QR code for evaluation for today's event. Please take a minute, give us some feedback. Tell us like what you liked, what you didn't. That helps inform future events and activities and what we do. With that, I thank you all for joining us here today in person, as well as those who are joining us online. For those who are here in person, fortunately, you get to join us in the back for lots of tasty New York seafood treats and our oyster shucking competition. So feel free to make your way up to the lobby and we'll get that started. Thanks, everyone.